Henry Sr. prepared to go out and meet a young lady on the night of the 3rd of February 1920. The ex-soldier took £10 out of a tin and put it into his jacket pocket. His mother questioned the amount of cash he was planning to carry, and on her advice he put most of the money back. When Senior left the house at Robson Street, Govanhill, Glasgow, he had about £2 on him. Henry went into town to meet this woman, who unfortunately did not turn up. The next morning, two young lads from the Deaf and Dumb Institution were playing football in the Queen's Park recreation ground. When going to fetch the ball near the fence, they stumbled across a man lying on his back. The face of the man was partially covered with leaves. The prone figure lay with his feet pointing down a slope, which led to a railway embankment, and his head in the direction of the fence. This as yet unnamed man was dead. His face had received terrible injuries, and it was clear that he had been beaten and robbed. His trouser pockets were ripped open, and the contents, 4 theatre ticket stubs, were found nearby. It's hard to work out exactly where the body was found in 1920. A lot of that section of Queen's Park recreation ground is now gone, lost to development. The new Victoria Hospital has taken a fair bit of the southern side of the parkland, and also the Glasgow Indoor Bowling Club is built over what was once the recreation ground. I think it's likely that the two boys who discovered the body would not have wandered too far and stayed close to the entrance into the park over by the Deaf Institution. So I think the body of Henry Sr. was probably discovered on land that is now the site or car park for the Glasgow Indoor Bowling Club. But remember, that is just an educated guess. The body was lifted and taken to the mortuary at the Queen's Park Police Office. The only clue to this man's identity was a discharged soldier's badge found on his clothing. Henry's brother read in the paper the next morning that a body had been found and informed the police that his brother had not come home after a night out. He was shown and then identified the corpse. The paper speculated that this had been a violent robbery. The Sunday Mail, printed on the 8th of February 1920, talks of the shocking brutality of the crime and how it must have been perpetrated by at least 2 men, as Henry Sr. was a well-built ex-soldier with a distinguished army career, serving with the 11th Hussars and seen action in World War I. Another paper, the Nottingham Journal and Express, calls Henry the Mons hero after the Battle of Mons in 1914, and says that he served throughout the war before being seriously wounded in 1918. The same paper also states that Henry worked as a stone hewer, which is someone who cuts and shapes stone for the building industry. So you would have to be strong to do a physical job like that. Overpowering this battled, hardened and strong man would not have been easy. The Sunday Mail talks of the extensive injuries Henry received. The bones of his face were shattered. A desperate wound over the bridge of his nose. A tooth lay near the body. Both eyes were blackened, and there were cuts and bruising over the face and neck. The paper also states that whoever attacked Henry would also be injured, as Henry would surely have fought back, and the attacker would have damaged his hands while beating the victim. The paper also discusses the possibility of a woman being involved. The Mail talks of a rumour of a frizzy, red-haired girl with an East Country accent being involved. I'm not sure if it means an Eastern Scottish accent. The paper says that after reviewing the evidence, and I quote, "It is impossible to imagine a woman being present and witnessing such a struggle as must have taken place, without interfering in some way, even if only in a hysterical manner." This speculation was to prove to be completely off the mark. The same paper talks about how public the site of the attack was, being right beside the road and with earshot of anyone walking down Cathcart Road. The Mail states that the night of the killing, It was a bright, clear, moonlit night, and the recreation ground is used as a shortcut by locals. The paper said that the attack probably took place in a house and the body was moved to the place it was discovered. Again, this proved to be wrong. Two men, Andrew Graham and Alexander Smith, told the police on the night of the murder they'd seen two men in the public toilets in Queen's Park Recreation Ground. The smaller of the men was washing his hands. Graham would later identify the man as Albert Fraser. Alexander Smith would also say the man he saw was like Fraser. John McIntosh, a tramcar conductor, reported two men boarding his city-bound tram at the Queen's Park Recreation Ground stop at about 10:30 p.m. on the night of the killing. McIntosh stated that the taller man had bloodstains on his hands and another one was carrying a pair of boots or shoes in his jacket pockets. They got off the tram in Union Street. McIntosh later identified Fraser as being one of the men. Several men came forward and reported being violently robbed in the city in the days leading to the murder of Henry Sr. Helen White was a young woman 22 years of age. She had moved from Paisley to Glasgow soon after marrying a Canadian soldier who was serving overseas. In Glasgow, Helen met Albert Fraser and they moved in together in Rose Street. Then they moved in with another couple, James Rollins and Elizabeth Stewart, living at Fernie Street, Maryhill. Later on, Rollins and Stewart moved out to live in Margaret Street before being put out and ending up squatting in a hayshed in Tollcross. On the night of the 3rd of February 1920, the four met up in Hope Street, where Fraser told Helen, "You get a man and we will follow you." Some reports suggest Helen worked as a sex worker, others that she pretended to be so she could set up unsuspecting men to be robbed. Shortly afterwards, a man walked up to Helen and asked her to go for a walk. This man was Henry Sr. Helen and Henry walked along Argyle Street before getting on a tram to Mount Florida. The couple sat on the top deck of the tramcar. Albert Fraser and James Rollins also boarded the same tram, walked up the stairs and sat at the front.
Explore Provan Hall after dark.
Is it really haunted?
Join us to find out.
If you dare.
Helen and Henry got off the tram and went into Queen's Park Recreation Ground through a gap in the fence. They sat on the grass, and Henry gave Helen a 10-shilling note from a pocketbook he had taken from his pocket. Then two men emerged from the dark. One of them asked Henry what he was doing, and Henry replied he was out for a walk with the girl. He could see in the dark that one of the men was carrying a revolver and pointing it directly at him. As Helen backed away and slipped back into Cathcart Street through the gap in the fence, she saw Rollins grab Henry Sr. from behind, place an arm round Sr.'s neck. As Rollins did this, Fraser punched Henry in the face, then hit him again on the face, this time using a revolver to punch with. Henry gave a slight "oh." Helen, clearly shocked, shouted at the men not to be so severe on the fellow, but she was not sure that the two attackers had hurt her. Helen boarded a tram and travelled back into the city centre as a violent and vicious attack and robbery was taking place. Henry Sr. was being punched again and again and kicked, inflicting these terrible injuries that were discovered on his face and body. After the assault, Fraser threw the revolver away, as it was now covered in blood. They took the footwear and coat from Sr. after rifling through his pockets and getting slightly more than £2 in cash. The men left the park and boarded a tram, where the conductor, John McIntosh, noticed blood on the hands of one of the men and the fact that the other had shoes or boots in his jacket pockets. Back in town, the two men met Helen in Union Street, just after 11:15 p.m. Helen noticed Roland's right hand was swollen and sore. There were a man's shoes, one in each of his jacket pockets. And Roland's also had a man's jacket, which he gave to Fraser, and Fraser handed it to Helen, telling her to be careful as it was soaked in blood. Fraser then walked into Central Station. While her lover was away, Helen asked Rollins how much they got from the attack. Rollins replied, about 6 shillings. James Rollins also stated that he did not know if the man was alive or dead, stating that the victim's pulse was not beating very fast when they left him. At around midnight, Helen White, Albert Fraser, who returned, and James Rollins were joined by Elizabeth Stewart. After arranging to meet at 2 p.m. the next day, Fraser and White left to go home to Mary Hill. At home, Fraser washed the bloodstains from the coat and hung it over the back of a chair to dry. The next morning, some children that stayed in the same lodgings asked Fraser about the bloodstains on the floor. He replied they had left some raw meat in his coat pocket and had forgotten to take it out. There is some confusion as to when and who washed the stolen coat. Some accounts say Fraser washed it the night of the attack, others say Helen washed it the following morning. Helen then took the coat and pawned it, giving her name to the pawn shop as Murphy and getting paid 17 shillings for the jacket. Fraser went out about 2 p.m. and shortly afterwards Rollins arrived at the house. Helen noticed James Rollins had iodine in one of his hands and the other was bandaged. She asked about his injured hands, and he told her that Fraser, while trying to strike Henry Sr. in the face in the dark with a revolver, had hit him on the hands by mistake. Rollins asked Helen to pawn the shoes, but she refused, so he pawned them in the same pawn shop that she had taken the coat. Rollins received 8 shillings 6 pence for the shoes. When Fraser returned, he divided the money that they had taken from Henry Sr. and the cash from pawning Henry's belongings between himself and James Rollins. Fraser then gave Helen 3 shillings to go to the pictures. All three left the house and went out, and they met Elizabeth Stewart, and the 2 women went to the cinema. Later, Fraser and Rollins joined the women in the picture house. The men had brought a newspaper that stated Henry Sr. was dead. When told this, Helen White became hysterical in the cinema. Realising that they were going to have to flee the long arm of the law, the 4 fled to Belfast. In Ireland, they asked and were given permission to sleep in a barn in the Cave Hill area to the north of Belfast. On the 8th of February, all 4 of them, Albert Fraser, Helen White, James Rollins and Elizabeth Stewart, were arrested in Belfast. Back in Scotland, the 4 were locked up in Duke Street Prison in Glasgow. The Crown persuaded the 2 women, Helen White and Elizabeth Stewart, to turn King's evidence, that is, to give evidence for the Crown in return for all charges against them to be dropped. Fraser and Rollins were tried in the High Court in Glasgow. Their lovers, Helen White and Elizabeth Stewart, were the key witnesses for the prosecution. While in the witness dock, upon being cross-examined, Helen, when asked to talk about the attack on Henry Sr., fainted and fell out of the box. Fraser and Rollins seemed to realise that they were doomed. Fraser stated that there's only one loophole out of this I can see, and that is the end of the rope. The Sunday Mail of the 9th of May 1920 talks about the 2 men, describing their behaviour in court. It tells that both men were sullen, indifferent and unmoved. That Fraser, with his dark, wicked and leering eyes, looked up proudly to the gallery and looked for some kindred face, willing to be honoured by his smile. The eyes betray a soulless, cast-iron demeanour. The Mail said that Rollins did show some emotion when his courage on the battlefield, for he must have fought bravely in the war, was discussed. Both men were found guilty and sentenced to hang at Duke Street Prison on the 26th of May. On the morning of the execution, thousands of people assembled outside the prison, waiting to see the black flag hoisted on the flagpole, indicating that an execution had taken place. Inside the jail, both men described as quite cool and indifferent to their fate, thanked the prison staff. Fraser went to the scaffold first. When Rollins arrived, he saw his friend standing at the gallows, already wearing a white hood and rope around his neck. As Rollins was being prepared, Fraser was heard to say, "Cheer up, Bill." This was the only words spoken between the pair. When the lever was pulled, both men fell to an instant death. Albert Fraser and James Rollins were to be the last instance when a double execution took place in Scotland. Henry Sr. is buried here at the Cathcart Cemetery. Family members surround him. It is a tragic story of a war hero and hard worker who was tricked and betrayed before being savagely and cowardly beaten to death for a couple of pounds. I checked Find a Grave Scotland to try and locate the resting place of Henry, but although his name can be found on the website acknowledging he's buried here, it does not give a location in this vast, overgrown and fascinating cemetery. Helen White gave a series of interviews with the Sunday Mail, the first being on the 6th of June 1920. In this article, she tells how she's been shunned by everyone since the trial and has to be looked after by the Salvation Army. Helen, who the paper calls Gladys, admits that her real name is Helen, but likes Gladys as it sounds more like a film star. The Mail on Sunday gives some background information on this female fatale. Helen White was born in Paisley around 1898 and became an orphan at a young age. She was sent to the north of Scotland to live in an orphanage. Fonder of sport than academic education, the paper says that she had a Dale-may-care attitude to life and was boisterous and enjoyed playing pranks with the boys. When she left the orphanage, she ended up back in Paisley, then Glasgow. Helen liked attending the cinema, spending hours watching the black and white films of the time. She also liked a man in uniform, and she met a Canadian soldier who she would marry in October 1918. But her husband was sent to serve in France. Feeling abandoned by him, Helen made her way to Glasgow, where the Mail states she roamed the streets, probably engaged in sex work. In Glasgow, White met Albert Fraser, an Australian soldier who had deserted but was still wearing his uniform. The Mail describes Fraser as having a magnetic personality and says that his eyes were possessed of a peculiar, searching and fascinating leer. The two spent time travelling around the country, Fraser working as a tinsmith, living in barns and sheds, before returning to Glasgow. Helen was dominated by Albert Fraser, and probably scared, as he had a wild and fiery temper. She stated that if she had not done as Fraser demanded and led Henry Sr. to a quiet place so he could be attacked and robbed, that Fraser would have given her a thrashing. If you've enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe. You might like to take one of our dark history tours, ghost tours, or paranormal investigations that are held in Perthshire, Glasgow and Stirling. If so, please visit our website, which is www.historyandhorrortours.com.